is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have Jeff Siegel coming in. He's the editor of Green Chip Stocks and Liberty Briefing. He's also coming out with a new book coming out on November 17th called The Libertarian Treehugger. So he's very into environmental issues, and that's actually one topic we've never really gotten deeply into on Anarchast with Anarchist, is how can we have a decent environment without the state? And Jeff has a lot of great ideas on that, so we're going to be talking a lot about that. And we're going to also be talking about the election that happened actually just yesterday. You'll probably see this in a few days. He's pretty fired up about that and angry. And so we'll talk all about that. But the first thing we have to ask though, Jeff, is how did you become an anarchist?
I think it's been a long transformative process over the years. Back in college, I was a pretty dedicated liberal Democrat. I worked on the Clinton campaign in college, and registered voters and raised money for the campaign. And I kind of got inside that world, and got worked with local politicians and fundraisers, and got a closer look at what I kind of call the underbelly of the beast. And I was pretty disgusted in what I saw, because this illusion that I had of fairness and freedom and all this stuff was kind of came crashing down around me when I saw how things really work inside a campaign. So I was a little disillusioned after that, but I was still kind of beholden to that kind of liberal democratic side. So after I graduated college, still pretty naive and young, I got a job at a financial publishing company in Baltimore, and I started helping to publish newsletters from guys like Doug Casey and Bill Bonner. Yeah. And coming from this kind of like very liberal world and reading this stuff, I was kind of a little bit taken back and shocked. And I was reading stuff that I didn't really understand, because obviously none of that stuff was ever taught in college or in high school. So I'm a pretty open-minded guy, and I started reading and kind of taking in what these guys were saying. And it was kind of a struggle, because like part of me was saying, well, this doesn't seem fair. There's all these problems in the world, and how can we fix these problems without the government? And because that's kind of ingrained in you, as you grow up. I mean, that's the bill of goods that you're sold. But the more I read and the more my mind opened, I said, I need to investigate this further. So I was kind of in this world with a lot of libertarians, and got a lot of good book recommendations. Started reading a lot about Austrian economics, and more and more, I really found myself in a situation where I was kind of almost in this kind of no man's land. I wasn't really sure what I thought anymore and what to believe. So to speed it up a little bit, basically around 98, 99, I quit my job and I went on the road for about 6 years. I worked as a touring musician. Had a great time, traveled all over the world. And traveling throughout the country, I got to see firsthand things that I'd never seen before. I saw poverty and drug addiction and violence and all these things on a kind of more personal level. And everything that you believe up to that point, well, the government's here to take care of these problems, but those problems still existed. And when you see them face to face, when you're driving through, the deep South, and you see the poverty there, if you're driving through Detroit and you see the violence and the drug abuse, and you start asking yourself this question, well, if the state is there to, help these people, and this has been going on for decades, shouldn't these problems been solved by now? And I think it was at that point, once I got closer to seeing how people really live day to day, I realized just how useless the state really was, and how important it was to kind of gravitate away from that, because I didn't see any solutions to these problems coming from the government. So around 2005, I left, I got off the road, and I went back to work for another financial publishing company. And at that point, I decided that all my kind of closely held beliefs about freedom and liberty and the environment, I wanted to find solutions to these problems in the absence of the government. And basically, I started investing in a lot of renewable energy companies and organic food companies, and really analyzing the market, and really just really coming to the conclusion that all of these problems exist not because the government hasn't really met its match or hasn't really delivered. It's because they're involved to begin with. I think at some point it was like I went from this, for these many years, I was like this, really leaning left liberal Democrat to this guy who just kind of gave up on the whole system and said, look, I really lean towards this libertarian philosophy, and a lot of people I worked with, and even people like you, Jeff, and I read your stuff, and I said, this really, my belief system really aligns with this kind of anarchist mindset. So I feel like I almost kind of fell into it, if that makes sense, after just basically spending a lot of time traveling and reading and I guess re-educating myself away from the college and everything that I learned in high school, and just kind of put that aside and decided I needed a better education. And I got that basically just by reading a lot and traveling.
Yeah, that's
the long version.
That's not too long. The last person, or a few ones ago, he talked for about 25 minutes on the first question, so that's not too bad. I don't mind, actually, by the way. I really like these stories about how people came to these conclusions, and it really shows, in your case, that a lot of people have this misconception that anarchists they don't care about anyone else. In actuality, many of us care a lot, actually more than most. We care so much that we actually look into what's really working and what's not working. And as you found out, the government is the cause of most of these problems and not the solution, including poverty and a lot of the drug problems in the U.S. That people have. It's because of the system that they've been so beat down for so many years that they're just looking for an escape. But you talk a lot about environmentalism. I want to talk about that. And I should mention, by the way, just so people know, that Jeff will be appearing at Anarchapulco on the beach behind me, February 27th to March 1st. We're going to have so many great people down here. It's going to be a great meeting, conference, festival, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be great. But actually, first we should talk about the elections, because I know you're steaming about that one.
Yeah, I guess I get very frustrated because I guess just because my belief system, I feel like I get kind of drawn into these debates with friends and family and coworkers and colleagues. You think I'm pretty much off the deep end, when I talk about how their vote is meaningless, and I feel like I justify that statement pretty well, and they don't want to hear it. And anyway, I wake up this morning and Republicans took the Senate, and here in Maryland, it was an upset. Republican won the governor. Which is, the state of Maryland it doesn't tip, it's been a long time since there's been a Republican governor here. So it's just funny, this morning, a lot of my Republican friends are just chest pounding and they're very excited, and now everything's going to change. And I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, nothing's changed. Nothing has changed now. Nothing will change in the next 2 years. And the fact that you believe this and you continue to believe this, it's just excruciating. And I don't say that to be, I try not to be judgmental or crass. It's almost like there's this reality, and it's staring us in the face. But so many people are so. I tend to use the word partisan slave. So many people are so ingrained, they're so connected to the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, that they refuse to realize that neither are really looking out for their best interests and really have no purpose whatsoever except to look out for their own best interests. And it's so obvious, and it just makes me crazy that no one. Or so few people realize this. So yeah, so this morning I'm getting a lot of emails from folks who are bragging, and some of my friends that are Democrats, and they're saying, what are we going to do now, Jeff? I know you're a big renewable energy guy, and now everything's ruined. And time and time again, I have to explain. It's like, no, none of this matters, And it's almost like I don't want to sound defeatist. Because I don't think it is defeatist. The fact that none of it matters really energizes me, because the fact that none of it matters means everything that we do outside of the government does matter. And trying to get that message across is very frustrating right after an election, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. I actually did turn on CNN last night. I get it down here in Mexico, and just out of curiosity, sort of like a morbid curiosity, and I couldn't believe like they were so into it. Like, oh, we have this state. Oh, this state's just come in, and it's like it all matters. But we know it's so funny because so many people, especially in the U.S., where they get really into this democracy thing, which is funny because the U.S. wasn't founded as a democracy, and actually all the founding fathers warned about democracy, but everyone seems to have forgotten all about that. Yeah, it's funny because every 4 years, oh, look, we have a chance to change things. And it's funny, too, because I was watching CNN and one of the guys was saying, well, you know, Obama's so, like, he's really down, like, no one likes him anymore. And then this person said, well, that actually happens to almost every president after about 6 years or so, it seems. Everyone just sort of doesn't like them anymore. And it's obvious why, because, of course, they're just doing nothing but screwing things up, and they actually can't help things. There's no way government can help except for to get out of the way or just to not be there at all. And so it's funny because every 4 years or 2 years, whatever it is, whenever these elections come up, people get all excited. Oh, look, we have a chance to change it. So the big swing right now has been, well, the Democrats have been so bad. And you remember back that no one seems to have a memory anymore, but everyone was like so against the Republicans when it was George Bush near the end, especially. They're like, oh my God, look at all these wars and look at all these things they're doing, these Patriot Act and all this stuff, and they're like, oh, we're going to change it. We're going to put in Democrats. And then Barack Obama comes in with his drones, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and he attacks other countries, and he totally screws up the economy by instituting all kinds of insane laws. And so now people are like, oh my God, this is so bad. Now we have a chance to change. Let's go Republican. It's like they just keep going and they just keep falling for it. But I think people less and less are falling for it. I didn't see the stats, but I heard that this midterm election had an incredibly low turnout compared to, I believe, the last one or any of the previous ones. So I think more and more people are just not caring about that sort of thing as much, and that's good because it's a very evil system, as you know. Let's talk about environmentalism, because this is a real topic that is a really it's interesting because we have so many topics, so we can kind of get along with some sort of right-wing people on markets, even though they don't even know. They think capitalism is what they have in the U.S. They think Keynesianism is good and central banks are fine. But we can get along with them a little bit on that side. But on the left side, one of the big issues that a lot of them have, and understandably, I'm not anti-environment at all. I don't want to live in a toxic waste dump. Is the environmentalist issues. And people have a real hard time getting their head around how it could be so much better without the government involvement. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's funny. You were just talking about how we go from Republican to Democrat, Republican, and when Obama came in, everyone was very excited. Everything's gonna be so great. He won the Nobel Peace Prize and everything. One of the big things that was happening when Obama first ran was, he was going to be the president that brought in all these great clean energy resources, and it's going to clean up the environment. That was from the left, and the right was saying, oh, he's going to kill off the oil industry, and we're going to be beholden to foreign oil producers. And of course, since Obama took office, he's done more for the oil and gas industry as far as special tax breaks and subsidies and things like that than any other president since I've been alive. And as far as bringing in alternative energy, he basically picked between the president and the Department of Energy, basically took a bunch of taxpayer money, basically stole money from the people, and said we're gonna find some really great alternative energy companies, and we're gonna give them a bunch of money. And of course, as an analyst, and I saw the list of companies when they first published it, and I'm sitting there shaking my head, going, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Half the companies they have on this list here are using like technologies that are going to be non-existent in 2 years. And it was one of those things that some of my colleagues, they couldn't understand it, but I totally understood it. Mm-hmm. And as we figured out, if you just follow the flow of money, you see, well, those are the guys that gave money. And that it happens on both sides. It happens on oil and gas. It happens on alternative energy. So here you have the situation where, renewable energy can be a very strong economic force. I mean, and the problem is, when the government gets involved and tries to support certain alternative energy companies, they're not picking the alternative energy companies that are the best technologically or the best, efficiency wise or cost wise. They're picking the ones that their buddies help them get elected, just like they do on the other side of the coin. So as an environmentalist, I see this, and it's so frustrating because folks who believe that alternative energy is something that we should not pursue have more fuel to add to that fire when the government gets involved and screws everything up. Now, let me pose this question to you: if the government wasn't there to give money to the oil and gas industry, or the coal industry, the nuclear industry, or the solar industry, or the wind industry, or electric cars, or any of it, okay, didn't give money to anything, didn't provide any regulatory frameworks, didn't even set up a system where anyone has to get approval from the government. Let's start there and see, and let's see where the market takes us. Okay. Now, I'm a firm believer that in a real free market where there's no government intervention, things like solar and wind and geothermal energy efficiency and electric cars, these things will thrive because the cost of maintaining systems and the cost of significantly less. And there are less issues involved with fossil fuel depletion and pollution and things like that. So, but we'll never know because every time we try to introduce alternative energy, the government has to have its hand in the kitty, and they're trying to control it. And they're trying to control the narrative on it, and that's what kills it. So, when the whole cylinder thing blew up, I wrote about that a year before it even happened, saying this is ridiculous. Why are they giving money to this company? This company is going to go belly up in a couple of years. The Chinese are going to crush it, and sure enough, it goes belly up, and then next thing you know, I'll see alternative energy is useless and solar is useless. No, the government's useless. Okay, it's not the fault of the technology. It's the fault of the people that get involved and that shouldn't be involved in it. Again, I tend to go on tangents sometimes, so just stop me if I go on too long about that. But from an environmentalist, to go back to the environmental question, the two biggest burdens to our environment really are energy production and food production. I mean, this is where we see the bulk of our environmental problems. And when I look at both energy production and food production, these are two industries that are heavily influenced by government intervention, whether it is through regulatory control or billions and billions of dollars in subsidies. To give you a perfect example, industrial agriculture and monocropping, things that are basically used to pump out as much product as fast as possible, using pesticides, using synthetic fertilizers. These things degrade our soil. They deteriorate our soil. They deteriorate the healthy bacteria in our soil. Without healthy soil, you can't grow food. So you have, on one side, you have industrial agriculture, which where we get most of our food. And then you have on the other side, small organic farms. Small organic farms actually don't get nearly as much money from the government as the industrial agriculture system. So when the Farm Bill comes up for a vote and they talk about how much money they're going to give for crop insurance or for new technology so they can make corn grow faster so you can put it in your gas tank, that kind of stuff is destroying the environment. But I get my food from a local organic farm, okay? The guy that I get my food from, he doesn't put pesticides on his stuff. He doesn't use synthetic fertilizers. He uses cover crops. He takes care of his property. He takes care of his soil. He makes sure that it's going to be here today, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. He's not trying to pump out corn real fast to feed a bunch of industrialized cattle or to feed the ethanol machine. And I can go to that guy, and it costs me a little bit more money to get my food from him, but it's because he's not getting that big fat handout from the government. So I'm looking at these two farms, a big industrial farm and a small organic farm. The industrial farm's getting all this money from the government. The organic farm's getting nothing really from the government. But the organic farm is doing right by Mother Nature and taking care of the soil and taking care of the land and taking care of the water. The other side isn't. Now, which side is controlled by the government and which side isn't? To me, that's an example of how when the government gets involved, and people want to, all the special interests in there they want a piece of the action. They want to wet their beak on something. And again, ethanol is a perfect example of that. Then you have environmental problems. There's the guy that I get my food from, I get all my meat from, my vegetables. If you go to his farm, you're not gonna you're gonna find the healthiest, happiest animals probably in the whole country. You know, they're not shoved in pens. They're not treated like soulless widgets. You know, if I go out there, it doesn't smell like toxic fumes or manure because he takes care of his property. His property, he takes care of it. The government is not involved. And to me, this is the perfect example of when the government is not involved, there's a better chance of the property owner taking care of that property and making sure that it doesn't fall victim to, you know, environmental catastrophes, really.
Yeah, and the government is so involved in so many ways in the food industry in the U.S., and there's the UN Agenda 21 that they're really rolling out, and they're really trying to close down all these small farms. They're trying to make everything industrialized, trying to get it all in the hands of a few people. And it's just terrible. It's you see SWAT teams going in, and someone will be selling raw milk, which is actually much more healthy than pasteurized milk, which has been radiated, and SWAT teams will go in. So the U.S. is just getting worse and worse, and they're trying to roll this out all over the place. But the U.S., of course, has the biggest police state and government around, so it's the worst there by far. And yeah, you bring up some great points about how the market will take care of itself. All of these things, all these subsidies, the whole ethanol thing was just a disaster. And you brought up as well, Solyndra. So the government steals money from people, and they're going to help you by investing that money into environmental companies. And you can just see the results, obviously, because they have no real incentive. They have no profit incentive from making sure those investments do well. They actually have a profit incentive from making sure their buddies get taken care of, and then they get paid. So it's ridiculous. Just leave the money with the people in the first place. And if there's a need for more environmental energy or things like that, the market will make it happen. And if there is no need, for example, if people don't want that, or if it's not feasible with current technologies, then the market won't do it. A simple person like yourself, a simple analyst, will just look at the numbers and go, well, we can't do that. It just makes no economic sense. But of course, in the government, economic sense is the last thing that they have. And they're actually the exact opposite. They have perverse incentives. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, talking about farms again and the government getting involved. And it was interesting. I was reading today about how in China, something like 40% of the once arable land is almost useless now for agriculture. And what's been happening is the U.S. government has been spending a lot of money to convince the Chinese producers to use our land to produce food for them. And we saw that with pork producers last year with the Smithfield deal. And essentially what's happening is the Chinese, you know, they love pork and they need to produce a lot more pork to feed a growing middle class. But they more and more they're finding that they can't make it work in China, so they're going to come here where the government says, yeah, come in, we have all this beautiful land, come on in, we'll give you some extra money if you set up shop here, because you'll provide jobs, because we're going to try to get you to provide jobs. And what will happen is, and what's happening actually, is they come here, they're going to produce more pork in these industrial farms, these concentrating animal feedlots. They're going to create more of our arable land in order to feed more Chinese people. And what do we end up with? More toxic slop, more problems, more problems with our water, and it's technically, I mean, this is our land, but the government's selling it out to the Chinese because they need some more bacon or something, and we get left with the trimmings, we get left with the pollution, and that kind of thing is very frustrating to me. And that's a perfect example of why really the government shouldn't even own any land to begin with, because if I have farmland and the Chinese want to come and use my farmland, they can come to me directly and ask me, hey, can we use your farmland to raise pigs? And I'll say yes or no, as opposed to where the government owns acres and millions of acres of land, and they say, well, it's, the taxpayer, covers it, so come on over, no big deal. It's the taxpayer that gets screwed on the deal. And to add to your thing about, you're talking about raw milk, we have a place up in New York, upstate New York, that we spend a lot of time up there. And there's a farm up there, a completely organic farm, completely sustainable, self-sustainable, and we get all our food up there when we're up there. And it's the farmer I'm good friends with. I was talking to him last summer, and he usually does a CSA program, but he last year he opened up a farm stand And he said, well, I'll just start selling some stuff out of the farm stand to see if I can make a little extra money. Well, during the summer up there, it's a big tourist time. This guy's pulling in $1,000 a week just from his farm stand. And he says the biggest sellers he has are things that people typically can't get, which is raw milk butter, and raw milk yogurt, and the fresh eggs. And, I'm not a doctor. I find nutrition and nutrition fascinating, and if I could go back in time, I would probably be a dietitian. But there's no doubt in my mind that after spending 2 months of eating fresh food and drinking raw milk every day, the amount of energy I had, it was off the charts. You feel better when you eat food that hasn't been tampered with. And the fact that the government wants to force these companies and these farms to tamper with it is just absurd. And it was funny. I was actually telling my wife. I said, I was having this raw milk, and she had some. She said, "Yeah, that's really good. I've never tasted anything like this before." I said, "Yeah, it's too bad. We can't take any home." And she didn't understand. I said, "Yeah, it's against the law for me to take this raw milk home to Maryland." She couldn't understand it. I said, I don't understand it either. It makes no sense. But the government has decided that I cannot take some milk from a farm back to my home in Maryland, which the fact that even exists, is so absurd that any person that even knows that should just throw up their hands and be like, I give up. Just go down to Washington and just be like, look, I'm going to drink raw milk. If you don't like it, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's another side is it seems like the government, especially the U.S. government, is trying to make food as bad as they possibly can. You look at the water in a lot of places in the U.S., they actually put poison in the water, and not many people seem to notice or care. They put fluoride in the water. Fluoride is poison. It's actually, one doctor said it's probably the biggest cause of cancer is fluoride, and they're actually just dumping that in the water. And that all started years ago or decades ago when it's actually like a side product from mines or something like that. And the one industrialist, and this is why people sort of hate capitalism, but it's totally wrong. They shouldn't hate capitalism. They should hate government. So this guy who had a business said, oh, I've got a ton of this poison. I wonder if I can sort of convince the government to put it in the water supply and they can pay me for it. And this has been going on for decades now and causing so many problems. And yeah, you brought up food. Down here in Mexico, we buy most of our food, same as you, from what they call mercados, essentially farmers markets. It's all locally grown, pretty much organic. And yeah, when I go up to the U.S. and I see the kind of food that people have access to in places like Walmart and things like that, it's like night and day. And yeah, so there's so many angles to this that the government is just never a positive force. It's actually an incredibly evil force, in my opinion, and they're just getting worse and worse by the day. One question I have for you, and this is sort of for the true environmentalists who might be watching this, they probably already gave up because they already don't like our free market angle. It can't be right that the free market would possibly be better than some sort of theft and violence-based system that we have today. So when you meet an environmentalist who's really hardcore and they just want everything to be pristine and perfect everywhere, which would be great if it could be, but we shouldn't use violence and theft to do it. What do you say about things like the oceans or things like that? How would we handle things like overfishing and things like that? What's your angle on those sort of questions?
Well, again, I mean, here's another example of the government being involved. I think the data from 2012, I believe, showed that the government subsidized commercial fishing fleets to the tune of, I think, $16 billion. And essentially that encourages them to overfish. A lot of these ships would not continue to go out with that, support from the government. I think that's one solution to that problem is getting the government out of the equation. Commercial fishing is really where, you get a lot of your overfishing. It's not, there are guys that go out and they say, well, limit, you can only pull in 5 tuna or something. But, those aren't the guys you got to worry about. If I go out and fish and I pull in 7 tuna, that's not going to break the food chain. It's the commercial fishers that go out, basically just throw out nets, pull everything they can in because they're incentivized to do so. I think that if the government was not providing the financial support to do so, you'd probably see less commercial fleets going out, or not less commercial fleets going out, but they'd be going out less. They won't be going as much to bring in more more fish. And also there, you have certain price problems too, where, because the government is subsidizing a lot of these commercial fishermen, you're not getting you're not getting a true market price for the fish. So it's funny to me when someone says they go to the store and if you look at the can of tuna that says, fresh pole caught tuna, versus like the regular tuna, the pole caught's going to be more expensive. Well, the pole caught probably came from, a bunch of guys that had a couple of boats and went out and went fishing and caught tuna, as opposed to, and they're not getting help from the government, as opposed to the big commercial fleets that are getting help from the government. So again, to me, it's a perfect example of how the government is actually facilitating the problem and not helping it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a great point about price discovery. And a lot of people, environmentalists in general, and not all, but a lot, are sort of those sort of left-wing types, and they seem to have no ability to understand economics. So they seem to think if there was no people with guns who were from the government out there, that we would just eat everything on the planet and there'd be nothing left and we'd all die. But there's, of course, prices get involved. So, for example, let's just say that there was a problem and there's less and less tuna every year. Well, the price of tuna would then go up. And it would go up to the point where it wouldn't make any sense to go get many tunas anymore. Hardly anyone would buy it because it'd be like way too expensive. There'd be a few people who could afford it, and that's fine. So the market takes care of it itself. It autocorrects, but when the government gets involved and uses all these subsidies and then regulations and all these things, it throws off everything to the point where you can't really even tell what makes economic sense anymore. And in many cases, like you pointed out, a lot of people are overfishing because they're being incentivized to do that.
Right. Absolutely, and you bring up a good point with the pricing issue too. I mean, I find myself often in that argument with people that say, well, I'd love to, eat local and eat organic food from the local farms, but it's just too expensive. My response is typically, well, it's actually cheaper. The only difference is the government didn't take your money first before you went to buy the food from the organic producer. The only reason that the food that you see in the store is cheaper is because the government made it cheaper, but actually they made it cheaper by stealing from you. So they basically took a bunch of your money and then offered you cheap food, but they still took your money. So it's kind of like it's not really cheaper. I mean, maybe the price you see it seems cheaper, but what you actually pay is not cheaper.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a real opportunity for us to try to wake up the environmental types. There's lots of them. There's millions and millions. They're all over the place. You see them marching all the time. But they don't seem to understand that the problem is government. They seem to think it's capitalism when it's actually the opposite. And of course, that's the plan of the government, is to screw things up so much that people are confused and think they need the government to fix the problem. But I think it's a huge opportunity. For example, many environmentalists get all angry about oil and we're using too much oil, which is kind of weird and crazy, but that's what they say. The biggest user of oil is the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. military on Earth. You look at environmental disasters, look at Iraq. That place is just full of radiation from all the things that they put there. Look at nuclear bombs dropped. That's not capitalism. Those are governments dropping nuclear bombs on citizens in places like Japan for no reason. They're the biggest, by far, destroyer of the environment. And if we can just somehow get environmentalist types to understand that, we can have a huge swing towards what we're talking about, anarchism, and towards getting rid of government, or at least reducing it as much as possible.
That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, the most recent book, and I've actually found some success. I speak a lot at environmental conferences and green conferences and some investment conferences. But typically, when I go to these environmentalist type conferences, I always challenge the audience. I say, if you really have a problem with the oil and gas industry, if you don't like the fact that we're so reliant upon petroleum products to keep the economy moving, if you really, if you hate coal and you're worried about climate change, the best thing you can do is to use your purchasing power to make a statement. If you hate oil and gas, buy an electric car. They exist. And some people will say, well, they're kind of expensive. Well, you know, you probably have $200 a month cable bill. You know, how often do you go out to eat every week? Once, twice, 3 times? What's more important to you? If you really are concerned about the environment, then it seems to me that you'll take that money and put it towards something that's going to help, you know, push the sustainability movement, even if that means having to give up HBO and, you know, eating a Red Lobster a couple times a week or something, you know. And you know, if you really hate the utilities and you really hate coal and you hate nuclear, put some solar in your house, man. You can do it pretty cheap today. You can get solar leases, no money down. But I don't really recommend. But you know, if you have the money, you know, throw some solar up on your roof. Even if you only put enough to cover 30% of your power generation, your electricity generation, that still offsets the amount of coal that will be used. You will do a lot more for the environment if you use your purchasing power than you will if you go out, you know, and vote. You know, or if you go and you write a letter to your congressman, or you get on some message board and you start, you know, railing against someone, you know, who doesn't agree with you about climate change. That stuff is useless, you know. And I think, and I've really been able to. I've had some decent success in convincing a lot of environmentalists of that. At one in particular, there's a conference I went to a few years ago in Wisconsin when I was talking about electric cars, and this one woman said, you know, I would love to get an electric car, but it's very expensive, and I just can't afford it. And I said, okay, well, you know, I don't know how much you make, and you know, it's not my business to ask you. But one thing I've always done in my life is anytime, and my father taught me this, is anytime you want something, and if you want something bad enough, you can make it happen. If you feel strongly about it, then you'll make it happen. And you know, in the world of you know, economics and finance and making money, you know, like I said, I spent 6 years of my life on the road as a touring musician. I mean, there were sometimes I was living on $5 a day, but you know, I still made it work because it's something I wanted to do. And we had this great conversation. And I saw her the following year at the conference, and she said, "Here, I want you to see this." And she shows me a picture of her new car, which was a Nissan Leaf. And she said, "You know, I figured out a way to make it happen. I couldn't be happier. I feel so," she said she felt so empowered, because it was the first time she felt like she could actually do something to, you know, in defense of the environment, and she was able to do it on her own. And that just made me feel great, because it was just like, because you made a decision, you made a personal decision. You didn't need anyone's help, and you did it on your own. And that just proves that you don't need anyone else but yourself, you know, to make things happen. And that's just a perfect example. So I preach that all the time. Please, if you really care about the environment, you know, and you're really worried about things, you know, buy organic food. Go to your local organic farmer. You know, walk more. You know, put an LED light bulb in your house. Do something. You know, because anytime you do that, it means a lot more, and it goes a lot further than, you know, voting for some guy who does not care anything about the environment or your needs.
Absolutely. It's democracy is really voting with your dollar, and it's a peaceful democracy. You're not actually forcing anything upon anybody through violence and theft. So it is much more empowering. Now, with the woman with the electric car, you probably shouldn't tell her that the electricity probably came from a coal plant, but don't ruin it for her just yet. But
no, we talk about that a little bit, okay. and I reaffirmed the fact that it probably did, a lot of that power did come from coal, because she was in Wisconsin, and I reminded her that it is much more efficient to move a vehicle with electricity versus a petroleum product 1 mile. So, you know, you will still use less power moving a vehicle with electricity as opposed to gasoline or diesel. So something to consider.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You brought up climate change, or they used to call it global warming, but now the world's getting so cold that they have to change it to climate change. What's your opinion on that?
You know, I think everyone's entitled to his own opinion. You know, I hate when people say I'm not a scientist. If you're a scientist, then nobody would be interviewing you, because no one interviews scientists. You know, basically you have two sets of thought. You know, there are the folks that provide. Well, let me rephrase this. Basically, if someone says to me, "Do you believe in climate change?" I will say, "No, I don't believe in climate change," because I don't think it's something that you can believe in. data, you're handed data and data analysis, and you can look at that data analysis, and you can decide whether or not you find it to be sound or not. If someone presents me with climate change data from the IPCC versus the climate change data from someone else who says no, there's no connection between humans and climate change, I will look at those two sets of data as a layman because I don't know, and I will make a decision. I will tell you that looking at the data as a layman, I don't think it's implausible that we have an impact on the climate, and I think that I think to vilify scientists who have made that connection is wrong, just as I think it's wrong to vilify scientists who say, no, there is no connection. Bottom line is, that's how science works. Scientists their job is to disprove theories. Climate change is a theory. And, there were people that want to disprove it. As an environmentalist, as someone, I do find the data to be compelling on climate change. But it's very frustrating, again, for me as an environmentalist, when I see people being very hostile towards people who are challenging that data and say, oh, well, you're a denier, and they're calling them names. That doesn't really accomplish anything. Again, I mean, I think, as someone who I can look at the data and the data analysis and say, yes, I find it sound, then it's my decision whether or not I want to, do things that would limit my carbon footprint. I think the worst thing we could do is to institute a carbon tax or institute some kind of carbon credit trading system. It's not a free, it's not a market-based system. And this drives me crazy is when, the government comes out and says, we want to do this carbon trading system because it's going to help mitigate the carbon problem, and it's a market-based solution. No, it's not a market-based solution because the government comes up with these credits just like the Fed comes up with money. They just create them out of nothing. That's not a market solution. That is a government intervention, and it's not a solution. So, I walked around the climate change thing is very touchy for me because I don't want to send people running for the hills, because I know that people get very fired up about it. But the bottom line on that is I think, believe what you want. If you think that the data is sound on climate change, then again, make changes in your life to combat that. If you don't think it's sound, that's fine too. Go about your business. It doesn't matter. But whatever you do, if you think that that this is a real issue, then act on your own to fix that problem. Don't look to the government, because I guarantee you, if they start doing this carbon trading thing, you think ethanol is a huge welfare scam. This will make that look like a corner drug deal. It will be horrible.
Oh, absolutely. The whole climate change thing, or man-made climate change, or man-caused climate change. First of all, once again, the government is the biggest problem here. A lot of those scientists, so-called scientists, they get a lot, billions of dollars of subsidies if they can kind of show that man is changing the climate. And of course, with data, you can skew statistics quite a bit, and that's what they do. So a lot of people will say, oh, look, there's a consensus. There really isn't. There's a lot of government involvement trying to skew everything. And if you really look into it, the amount of carbon dioxide in the air is so small compared to the biggest, well, obviously the biggest cause of global warming, if there was any, which there isn't, and there hasn't been in like 15 years. The biggest ice pack in Antarctica in I think a century or more is right now, is government involvement. Is just they just get so they just screw everything up. But with carbon dioxide, you know, obviously the sun is the biggest contributor to warming on this planet. I don't think that's disputable. And of course, then there's water vapor in the air. That's a much bigger change in the climate than anything. Carbon dioxide is so small. And then of all the carbon dioxide, of course, that's what trees eat. And that's what we breathe out of our mouths. And they're trying to tax it. Of all the carbon dioxide, the amount of man-caused carbon dioxide is a small fraction of the amount of carbon dioxide. So, yeah, to get the government all involved, and we're going to like clamp down all around the world. We're going to force people to close plants. We're going to force people to buy these credits, which is mostly an Al Gore contraption. It's ridiculous, and that will actually cause much more harm than good in any way. And I think you're right on that. And the good thing is, it seems to be really just going away. People are catching on to how ridiculous it is for the government to try to get involved in this. And I think you bring up great points. Self-responsibility. If you want to make change in your own life. Don't give your rights to the government to go use violence to make people do what you want to do. And as you show with that one woman, it's so much more empowering to make change in your own life. You can see it, you can feel it, you feel good about yourself. That's great. You never get that with the government. Nothing the government does ever feels good, because it's violent and it's thieving. So yeah, I think it's great that you're coming out with this book, because I've said it for years that I think that's a huge area that we can really get our message across to, is the environmentalists. And so your book hopefully will become really big. And I can understand why you're kind of walking softly around some of these questions, because you don't want to be too extreme with these people, because they haven't heard these concepts before. So if you come out with like just blasting them on how ridiculous some of their concepts are, they won't listen. So you actually have to speak calmly, gently, and just slowly let them know, by the way, the biggest cause of the problems in the environment is the government. Here's some data, here's some stats. You can't really force it in their face. You can't get all angry. But of course, on the other side, the real statist environmentalists, those are the guys that get really violent. There was one celebrity at a recent New York event who was saying that anyone who even denies there's climate change should be put in jail. That's getting pretty crazy.
Who said that?
I think it was one of the Kennedys, one of the ones who hasn't got killed yet. Bobby, or I don't know who it was, but yeah, there was this girl, again, independent media, and I think she's an anarchist, so she's there with her camera, just like Luke Rudowski and many of them, and asking real questions, which hardly anyone does anymore. And he got so mad at her, and she said, well, why don't you stop using your cell phone? You know, that caused, there's a lot of mining involved to create that cell phone. And he was like, no, you're crazy. It's not about me. It's about, you know, we have to change everybody. You know, people like Al Gore, who have numerous multi bedroom mansions. I think his electricity bill is like $10,000 a month. Right. You know, these people, they're using environmentalism to push forward their own brand of communism or fascism or big government. And that's where that term watermelons comes from. A lot of the environmentalists are green on the outside but red in the inside. So that's a whole other issue. But for true environmentalists, and look at the founder of Greenpeace. He quit the organization because he said it was basically taken over by a bunch of communists who don't even listen to stats or facts. They just want to make people do what they think is right, and in many cases what they want to do is totally not right. So there is people out there. So hopefully your book really can help change things and get more of those people who care about the environment, which includes myself. I care about it. I'm personally a minimalist. I don't like to have very many material goods. That's just a personal thing that I don't like to have. I find the more things you have, the more it's just that they own you more than you own them. So I generally don't own more than a few computers and whatever I need to do business, some clothes, not very many of them. As you can tell, I wear the same clothes most of the time. I just try to live quite minimally, and I find that a nice way to live. So I'm an environmentalist. You could call me an environmentalist. I care about the environment, but what the solutions are, in most cases, are completely wrong.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up the Kenny. It just reminded me of the whole Cape Wind project, the offshore wind project up in Nantucket, where you know you got a lot of the Kennedys they're very so-called pro-environment, but the second that you want to put a offshore turbine out in their $1 million view, then it's a problem, and they spend literally tens of millions of dollars to fight it. So the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. It's like, yeah, I'm all for using offshore wind turbines to generate clean power, but I don't want to see it. And because I'm a wealthy individual, I shouldn't have to see it. Let the poor people see it. It's just the hypocrisy is if it wasn't so disgusting, it would be laughable.
Yeah, I agree. We should wrap this up. Why don't you let people know where they can get more information on green chip stocks, your new book coming out, and anything else you're doing?
Yeah, greenchipstocks.com. I basically do market analysis for a lot of renewable energy companies and organic food companies, and also just do basic stories on ways to invest in alternative energy. It not necessarily has to be stocks. There are a lot of new crowdfunding opportunities, and even like personal things you can do as far as, you know, buying organic farmland. It's a number of things that you can do. So we discussed that at Green Chip Stocks, and libertybriefing.com is a new site we launched this year, which is, you know, based on the name. Obviously, we just really focus on stories where we see, you know, it's a very pro-liberty site, and we try to highlight stories where, you know, folks their rights are being violated, and we want to draw attention. And these tend to be stories that don't get a lot of press, and those are the ones that we try to put out because we want more people to see it. You know, usually things about people's gardens being disposed of by the government because they don't look pretty enough for a neighborhood, or again, we're talking about raw milk, and a farmer who barely makes $20,000 a year is getting bullied by the government because he has the audacity to sell milk from a cow without going through the government. So we discuss things like that. And so libertybriefing.com is where you can read that. And also the book will be out hopefully November 17th. I'm putting the finishing touches on it now, and it will be on Liberty Briefing, Green Chip Stocks as well. And the book the last two books I had, Investing in Green Chip Stocks and Energy Investing for Dummies, were done through Wiley Publishing, so they were sold. This one I did on my own, and it is free. I'm not charging for it. I want people to read this book. I want people to see how important it is, how the cause for liberty is intertwined with the cause for the environment. So the ebook is free, and I hope to have a actual hard copy early next year, and that will also be free. So please check it out and pass it along.
That's great. And so when that's out, please let me know, and we'll put it in the links down below as soon as it's out. And that's great. You're doing it for free. A typical anarcho-capitalist, you greedy capitalist, just trying to get all this money by changing the world for the better. So yeah, that's great. Awesome stuff. You're, of course, going to be here on the beach at Narcopoco coming up February 27th to March 1st. If you haven't checked that out, check it out. There's going to be pretty much most of the past Anarchast guests are going to be there. It's going to be a really great event. A lot of smart people, a lot of interesting people, so check that out. And of course, subscribe, like down below. Just click like, please. Just share some of these things. That's how we change the world, and it's all environmentally friendly. You're actually not chopping down trees on the internet here, so it's all good for the environment. So if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe or like or share our content. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
This is Anarchast.